All right, Rita.
Okay, so what you have printed out, and Julia, these things were emailed to you this afternoon. So you got 2 scoring sheets, one from this year, one from August. So you can compare and contrast.
Got it.
The other thing that was sent out, so in the email with these attachments, there was also a link to a time tracker that tracked the minutes by category of regular board meetings from September through June 15th. So I sent to you, and it's a pretty long document. It's a Google sheet thing, and too long to print out. If we need to, we can put it on the screen. But I tried to pull out some highlights that, things that struck me that might be of interest to us in terms of process improvement. And that was sent to you like an hour ago.
Is that this one?
That's yes, I think it's called.
November 2020 to June 15/21.
Yeah. Okay, so we want to start with scores or with time?
Well, let's start with the scores. I noticed that, so I got much more optimistic, except for on the continuous improvement one. But on all the other ones, I scored higher than I did the year before. So I think that is a little bit of either optimism or ego that, oh, things are better now that I've been there, right? So I believe we should just throw my scores out at this point. But I think it's, Amy, what happened on communication and collaboration? Because you gave us a 5 before, and now you're like.
Maybe you had more fidelity to the rubric, so I would like to.
Actually, I don't see a score for Amy on that one.
I would like to address
But
that.
it's on the very top.
Oh, why not?
Submit a score on that.
For communication and collaboration.
This time I didn't, or last
I
time?
actually found Andrew's, the spread quite remarkable.
I didn't know if that was deliberate.
On the very
or we just
back?
missed it, or.
Where
You went from a
Were there
10
To
to
look back at it and
7.
see. So I would like to share an
You were at
observation
37 on the
that I
one.
had.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Amy, sorry.
So I really appreciate that we're doing this. It's like, we all know it's really important for boards to do a self-evaluation. Council went through a lot of trouble to figure out, what does student focused governance look like, and to develop this rubric, which I think is great. For me personally, I hope that we in the next year can create a hybrid of this that we really feel like we own, because I felt like this rubric was extremely prescriptive, like all and as opposed to generally adhering to the principles and patterns described herein. And so, I'm of 2 minds on that. I'm of well, who cares about their rubric? And, I'm going to just put us where I think we are, or, well, if this is how they tell me I'm supposed to score, then that's how I'm going to score. But my point being that I don't think it's as useful to us as another tool could be. And I also think that there's some things that would be helpful to capture and discuss that just aren't in here at all, that have more to do with some of the stuff we've talked about with our communications protocols. So I'm not dissing this process whatsoever, because it's the best we got right now, but I hope that collectively we have an appetite to just use something a little bit different next time around.
Did we lose Julia?
So Amy, I agree. And I think the question for me though is, do we start with this as a template and then just make changes to it, or start with something else? I would probably say start with this, because
I think so too. I think
a whole bunch in here I like.
Me too.
And then there's a few things that I just absolutely reject.
Me too. I mean,
don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And I tried to score us according to that, even though we didn't do it, even though I thought we shouldn't do it, I still said we didn't do it. And I do just want to know, this is remarkable. I had not, and because my scores are still not good. It's so interesting that I went from the lowest score last year to the highest score this year. And but the weight, also the other thing, the weighting, I don't love. It's so weighted that when I went from 10 to 25 on the first one, that's 15 points. And I went from 0 to 10 on the third one. And that's, so already that's the 35 points. Yeah.
So can I make some observations based on the feedback I got when people were either contemplating this thing or sending their scores? I think everybody was way more faithful to the rubric itself this time around than the last time. So, and I think part of it is, but especially around, I've got a lot of questions about guardrails. We don't have any. So, and I would like to think that's because we had talked about guardrails earlier. And so it was a known thing.
Guardrails.
Well, I think last year in
I completely
August,
dispensed with even trying to throw it
I
out.
love it.
So this is my last day.
so we went to Harvard in 2019 and we, began this journey of what is governance and how do we want to govern ourselves as a board. And part of that was the recommendation to do a self-eval. And the first time we did the self-eval was in August. Yep. And so it was brand new to us. It was the first time we'd seen it when we did this in August. So I think we've spent a year talking about these things at our board retreats, learning more about, because I was like, why do we need guardrails? I don't understand it. And you've done a great job of helping us get closer to understanding what they are. Yeah, you're still like, no, but I think that's why we maybe were more faithful is because we understood the tool better. And now I think because we understand it better, we can adapt it for ourselves.
I agree.
Because we spent a year living with it and saying what works, what doesn't,
So can I just respond to that? And this is totally my personal opinion. And I guess let me preface by saying, I've been deep in some weeds on the council model for the last 4 months or so. I think there's some pieces of it that I think are really valuable. There are others that I kind of don't really understand why they're so adamant about this. And then there are others where I think, where I really need to be shown why you want people to do X.
Not an intuitive value.
Yes, so.
I agree.
So I have, what I'm about to say, I don't want anybody to hear it as, I'm a zealot for the council model. That's not what I'm saying. What I do want to say is, before you change the rubric, I would strongly recommend that you talk about the elements of the rubric. And before you toss something out of the rubric, make sure that it's something you have made an actual decision not to pursue. Not just, yeah, we're not doing it, so let's not score us. So I guess my recommendation is, well, I'm going to cut to the chase, what I was going to end up with tonight, but I'll say it right now. This board has been flirting with the council model since 2019. And you've been doing it kind of sort of almost sometimes. And you're going to get 2 new board members, and whenever there's a change in personnel, you got to start all over again. So I would strongly recommend that the next board seriously think about what you want to do in terms of process improvement, what you want to do in terms of evaluating and improving governance practices. If you decide to do the council model, I would strongly recommend that you take it more seriously than we have over the last 2 years. And please don't hear this as a criticism, because I'm, a lot of this happened on my watch.
We're on the journey together. Yeah.
And the council model, you may decide to throw it out altogether and go with OSBA. in which case you really gotta know what the OSBA model is and make sure that they actually have one. But I mean, I think this whole topic deserves a real, a serious discussion about what you want to do.
I have a question. Are there other models besides those two organizations that we could look at? Are there any that focus on anti-racist values, for instance?
What, I'm sure there are.
I mean, this does, but I think
I
specifically for school board governance, not that I know.
Or I wonder if anybody's working on.
mean, this is what I would say about so I've been having to delve into the school board lit. It is an emerging field, let me put it that way.
That makes sense.
It is, the lit is, there's not a lot out there. I think the council one is probably the most articulated that I've seen. Is it, it is what it is. So anyway,
I mean, I think my question is, if there were a better model out there that more closely aligned with our values as an organization, and you're saying it's kind of emerging.
Well, I guess the best
The
I can,
literature is more.
the best I can say is I am not aware of it.
Yeah, I don't think
Which
so.
doesn't mean it doesn't exist, it means I'm not aware of it.
And that's why they did this. I mean, they just put this group together like 4 years ago to create it
In
because there
response.
wasn't.
To a lack.
Hey, Rita,
Yeah,
I have a question. Have they, since they created it, updated it at all? Or is this like the, 1.0 version of it?
I don't know. This is the one that I have seen. I don't know if there were previous iterations of it. As far as I know, this is it.
But if
Maybe
we
it-
want to influence it, now our superintendent is on the governance
Right, yeah, so
subcommittee.
that's the other thing. I mean, after we've now done this twice. If you have thoughts, have asked. I would, if I am, I'm taking this training with the guys who are doing it. Okay, with the people who are doing it.
Yeah.
I would be happy to convey some feedback, but you don't have to go through me. You can just, I mean, Amy has lots of ties with the council, the Guadalupe, so lots of ways to get them feedback.
So kind of a friendly amendment is if y'all go through this and want to jettison something before you do check with the council, maybe have arranged for some time to make sure you thoroughly understand it before you throw it out. Like we didn't do guardrails at first because we didn't understand it. Now we have a bit more of an understanding. I wouldn't say thorough, but a bit more. And I would suggest take one more, get it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
And then decide if you want to say, this just isn't where we need to focus our efforts. And who knows, maybe in 3 years, it may emerge as, oh yeah, this is something we want to do, but there's probably other things that are more important to focus on.
One interesting piece of the self-evaluation is that I didn't realize this till I read the directions and was doing this. I did my scores a week ago Sunday because I suddenly have this window of time. So I was like a week early because I like to be the first one to turn my things in. So I just to annoy Rita. And what I noticed in the instructions was that Guadalupe, the superintendent, is supposed to participate. And that is not something we did in August. And again, it was new test. So I emailed Guadalupe and I said, hey, the directions say you're supposed to be part of this. And he said, well, since that's not like the established expectations of the board, I don't feel comfortable. But that's just something for whatever the next phase is with the new board leadership is to think about do we want to follow that part of the instructions as well to have the superintendent be part of the board evaluation.
One of those opportunities to either follow the rules or break the rules.
Right, and either side,
Again,
it was just like, it was just like, oh, these are in the rules, so I'm gonna let him know and see what he thinks, because we're learning this tool still and the process of it.
And I think the other thing, we talked about how close you follow the actual rubric. I think is to have that agreement up front that no matter if you kind of don't like it or not, we're gonna follow it so that everybody has the same, it's going in as leveled as possible in terms of the understanding of what each factor is. And it's because if you're not, then the scores are gonna be, oh, well, I meant this by this, oh, and you meant that by that.
Well, I think that's why they're having a conversation about things we want to change. I mean, for instance, I still don't think, if the board wants to do guardrails, then we should adopt them and score ourselves on that. I think guardrails are most likely, when I go through this whole thing, it's the Council of Great City Schools got a lot of pushback. And it's the only thing you can, judge a superintendent on is student performance. And so guardrails are a way for them to say, we're still adhering to that, but we've allowed you to put these other things in there that are really not focused on that. So, but I mean, that's my read of how the document probably evolved over the last few years. But, like, I'm fine if the board says we don't want to judge ourselves on guardrails, then we just come. And I agree with you. We're having a conversation with Council of Great City Schools. I'm not afraid of that.
Yeah.
Even if
I'm not saying, okay, I'm saying, we got a lot out of, I mean, we had much better of it understanding guardrails after we actually got some information about it. That help, that's gonna help our decision making process. And maybe, there's something that we're missing because we read it and it makes sense to us.
so as we go,
And can I, before I get off this, were there things that ought to be in, that we should add to the rubric, in your opinion, that aren't there? Also,
well, I was going to suggest, why don't we go through and talk about our scores and at the same time talk about what we want to make changes to. Rubric, obviously, we won't make those changes to it because we need to involve Gary and Herman in the conversation, but at least start the conversation and take some notes around it.
And Gary and Herman are going to help. The thing we did at Harvard, they're going to get to go this summer, but unfortunately
Virtually.
it's virtually. So that's really sad, but they will get to go. They will get to experience some of the same classes and trainings. And
We're going to virtually watch it. Red Sox game,
I don't know if they're going to virtually watch the Red Sox game.
which is also just another time.
Actually, it's so sad. I was just in
I know.
Massachusetts last week and everything's open.
But for whatever reason, help is still virtual.
I know.
So,
If anybody has the case studies digitally that we did, I would love them.
we lost our access after so long.
yeah.
Michelle, you were our council.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Categorizing. Okay, I bring that up all the time.
in 2019.
Okay,
Okay, so we're gonna go through the first one, right? Vision and goals.
Rita, if you want to stick me as a approaching on communication and collaboration, if we're still in the tabulation business. I don't really care.
Approaching. Okay.
Okay,
On,
approaching.
on the note about
Communication and collaboration.
On the note about following the rules, it also says we should have a trained facilitator walk us through this process. So if we're gonna remain tight to the rules, or we're
Yeah.
gonna kind of pick and choose as a menu.
What do we want to do?
So, yeah.
And one of the things, Rita is doing this governance coaching program with Council of Great City Schools. And so she has said that there are other coaches that have been trained before her are being trained with her. So that might be something we might, if that's what we decide to do, we might want to think about having a coach from Council of Great City Schools. When we did this in August, there were only 2 people available. One was AJ, and I can't remember who the other person
So there were
was.
2 other people.
There were 2 other people, and it just didn't work out to have them come.
Who were
for
they?
August.
Who are they?
Monica. I don't remember her last name. And somebody from Texas, somebody from Iowa.
But that's a good point, Michelle, that we want to, if we do
I know.
embrace this process, then we should probably think about,
They're not
do we
even,
want to have a facilitator or governance coach to work with us throughout the year?
Okay, we want to dive in.
Vision and goals.
I would suggest that just to give structure.
yeah,
I'm trying to figure out what the point spread is between our scores over time, except Julia's, which look consistent. Are they, can we double check?
I think there's some
Score.
addition errors on the scores. Because the total I get for Julia is actually 28, not 16. 10, 5 is 15, another 10, 20.
I was going to say, because I'm almost in the middle column, or like that one to the right. more often than anybody else, so I don't know how mine could be the lowest.
I actually think there are several addition errors on this one. If you wanted me to retotal it all, I'd be
Please
happy
do.
to do so.
Wait, where is it total?
On the
On
back.
the back.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
I'm trying to figure out. yeah.
I noticed
No.
that when I was inputting all of this stuff, I was making a lot of mistakes. So
It's totally okay. I know you're working on this today.
And the other issue is like on communication, I gave myself a 10 and the rest of you a 0 and had to have it.
Get 10 too. Depending on what the criteria.
All right,
is.
I'm gonna start on vision and goals.
Yeah, so
That's
all
okay
of the
with you.
numbers on the back of 21 are incorrect. So I will read out the new ones as soon as I've done adding them. Maybe yours is correct. But I'm gonna start with it.
So on vision and goals, I put us in the 25, and probably it was borderline. Well, it wasn't probably. I thought we were borderline, but one of the reasons why is I just felt like we had made good progress here, and even with COVID, and even though we had to take a step back, you know, we as a district, we have developed interim goals for each of the measures, even though the measures were, you know, well, they weren't put on hold. I need to remember that like we decided not to use the measures to judge Guadalupe's, you know, as part of this evaluation, but we still have the measures. We're still tracking the data. You know, those targets are still there. We just all accepted that once we get new baseline data, we probably have to adjust those targets. I just felt like we were making really good progress there, which is why I went with the 25. What was the last comment I had here? Oh, is that community engagement was the area that I didn't feel like we were quite there in terms of meeting student outcomes focus, but I still think it's quite better.
Are you
So
just
it was- I was-
reading off your raw scores?
I was explaining the notes I took because I was why I gave it 25 for here. And yeah, particularly I think it was around the board included students, parents, staff, and community members in goal and goal development process. I felt like we probably didn't do that as much as we could have, but I still think it's a good.
Well, we did it, but we didn't do it this year.
Did we in the
Well, I
original
guess no, it
goals,
was this year.
36 months.
did we include students, parents, staff, and community members in the original goal setting process?
Well,
Well,
in our board
In the
goals?
visioning, not in the board
Yeah,
goals.
the board goals.
yeah, the board goals
No.
came right after the vision process.
Oh, yeah, I guess it was just the visioning.
But if you count things like, you know, the renaming process, which was a really broad engagement, wasn't necessarily us.
Yeah,
But that's not one of the goals.
I know, and I didn't include that.
Also not district-wide either.
Yes.
right.
So a question, if we're more or less in agreement with
Andrew.
Andrew, then the question for next year becomes, since you'll be revisiting the goals in a sense anyway with community board members, whether you want to do an engagement process around the goals, or focus elsewhere because we have very limited
Engagement.
engagement capacity, and there might be other areas where it's one.
I'd be interested from hearing from Julia, Nathaniel, and Michelle because they scored that area lower, vision goals lower. What were some of your all thoughts?
I'm looking for my notes right now.
I think that when I looked at this, I was thinking about vision and goals, not just our board goals. So
Yeah.
both vision with a lowercase v and a capital V.
So by way of feedback to the council, this category is called vision and goals. There's not a single word in here. Well, there's one word in here about vision.
There's two.
Yeah,
In the first column and the last column. It says on the.
they have,
yeah.
you have adopted a
You have
vision,
up to-
bare
you- that we
minimum.
express ownership of the adopted vision is in the last one, but yeah, in the middle, there's nothing.
It discusses in the second one.
And the second column, you're right, there, vision process. Vision.
And to be a little fair to us and to your point, Amy, is that we did the goals right after the vision process, and it really didn't make sense to do a whole nother process around goals at that time in terms of community. Just talk to us about that, just that. Why do you want to
And
do
we
that?
learned a lot.
Yeah.
And then we did it again with SIU.
Yeah,
So,
God, that was fun.
Yeah, I guess what I would say though is the question is, because, and this came up, and I don't know if Julie wants to jump in. I mean, we had a lot of conversation about how aggressive to be.
Yeah.
That was really the main thing.
Yeah.
And there is sort of an interesting question of how do we bring the community along in that? And by the way, I'm really sympathetic to your point about capacity, because community engagement is extremely hard and time consuming. And so we need to recognize that to the extent we are directing the superintendent to do that, we're taking the resources from other things in order to do it. It is still also important. As we read through the goals, once we have the baseline data, that is an opportunity to kind of go back down and say, and I have mixed feelings about community engagement around actual goal. I mean, setting the goal, like, is it going to be third grade reading and math? Like, that's something that's important. Saying, are we going to increase by 3%, 5%, or 10%, gets challenged, because your average community member will say, well, no, I'm not okay with a 5% increase. I want to see a 20% increase. And getting that community to really understand the operational impact. And this is something, even we as a board, this is a conversation we had. Why can't we do more? And as I remember, it was Guadalupe who said,
are you kidding me?
are you willing to bring me the, additional $100 million of resources,
Yeah.
$200 million of resources to achieve it? You can say it, but if you can't achieve it, what are you doing?
We'd also talked about rather than doing straight percentage points, we were looking at increases. I can't even remember how to say it. Do you remember rather than in our SMART goals, we didn't say, increase by 11 percentage points. We were looking at the rise
Toward proficiency,
toward proficiency.
the march toward
The march,
proficiency.
we were measuring on
Right.
the march toward
The growth.
proficiency rather than the growth, rather than a hard
proficiency.
percentage. But yeah,
Andrew, I agree with what you said about, engaging the community and the nomenclature of like percentages around goals. But one thing that I think could be pretty interesting for us to weave in here is I think that we have a general interest in engaging our community much more in conversations about student achievement, both writ large, but also parents' own child's achievement, and really kind of ripping the Band-Aid off and being much more transparent about that kind of stuff. Because right now, I would say we're somewhere between, poor communication and overt obfuscation
I still remember
about
the
student
parent-
achievement.
I still remember
Yes.
the parent who came in and said, my child is getting A's in the class. And then when they take the SBAC or the math, they're not proficient. So how can they get an A in English and be exceeding in language arts and not meeting proficiency standards? And I know that there's some issues with the SBAC and like Russ has talked about, that it's higher than where grade level was before. But I think that's a huge, like, what are grades and what do they mean and what do they communicate to parents? I think is a big frustration.
And sister is a reading specialist. And she said, yeah, I've got 3 kids who are really good readers and they just do not test well. So
Yeah,
there's
that's
gonna be, on the one hand, there's gonna be a percentage where the test just doesn't tell the story. On the other hand, there's the percentage where the test does tell the story and the grading function.
Right.
This is a nice kid and he's like, "All right, I'll give him an A," kind of thing. Is the story. And, that's a whole.
It's very
nuance.
subjective.
Right, but that's where I think we can help parents ask the right question when they come in for conference, or say, I want to meet with you because I've got this and this and this is.
Well, not just ask the right question, but like make sure they have the data, not just SBAC, but like formative data from their own classrooms.
And understand what you.
Yeah.
So I think,
and
I
understand
want
what
us to
you-
think about like where this is operational and where this is board purview, but it is, when it's tied to the goals and the student outcomes and how we're communicating that to the public and also getting feedback from parents about what they want to see for their students. I think it's about that, to have that be clear.
We have had battles before about even releasing maps information to parents.
Well, I know we've talked about changing the way
Not
we do
maps,
our
but
work.
it's predecessor.
I know that one of the things that has come up in bargaining in the past is
No
around
maps.
the report card and changing the report cards to give different and more information, and that's been a very difficult hill to climb. Yeah. Okay.
Generally speaking, I liked this particular, I mean, this is the one that you know, has the biggest score, right? So weighted the highest. And I actually agreed with most of the things on here. I mean, like in terms of getting to mastering all of those, I thought, yeah, this makes sense.
I agree. There's nothing that this elevates as virtuous that I disagree with.
Right.
So Michelle, do you have, and Julia, we haven't heard from, I don't think, about their scoring on here.
And can we invite Jackson to the table?
I didn't hear your question, Scott, if you were asking me one.
Because he's not sworn in yet, he is here to observing the process. So,
So the observers we don't.
well, because the technical difficulty is that Gary and Herman and Jackson haven't been on the board, and so, you know, some of this, but Jackson's in a different role than Gary and Herman because he's been like active on the DSC. So that was the asking folks to do the self-evaluation, to get on the board, and having the other folks be here to like learn about the process and to ask questions about the process. But if you all want to invite Jackson to the table and have him be part of the conversation, that is up to the will of the board.
Even people who are observing, I always feel better when they're in this room.
Yeah, come on, Jackson.
If you want, it's up to, I say it's up to you,
When
whatever
he
you
first sat
want.
over there, I'm like, why is Jackson sitting over there? And I'm like, oh yeah, because he's an observer. But
Well, and also this is a look back
right,
evaluation, not a forward
right,
necessarily, which if it was forward conversation, I
absolutely,
would
yeah.
say it would be approved.
So anyway, Julia
yeah.
and Michelle, my question is, you got us as an approaching as opposed to meeting. Nobody had us at mastering, and just any comments you want to make about what led you to score there?
Yeah, besides the fact that maybe I'm a hard grader on this, I felt like, I mean, we do have the SMART goals. I'm trying to look at where I was last time. I haven't moved really from where I was last time in our first evaluation.
So what in the green? You see as
What in the
not-
green?
So
What in the green?
the green is meeting.
His meeting and the yellow is
The
approaching.
yellow is approaching.
So are there one or two things there where you think we're not nailing on the green?
Maybe the all board goals last from 3 to 5 years. All interim goals last from 1 to 3 years. The goals and interim goals, because I don't think we have any interim goals established.
Yeah, we
We
did.
do.
We do.
Those are the 1 year.
The 1 year, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we talked.
Looks like all my scores stayed the same.
My scores are very close when I look at the spread. Mine are, you know, within 4.25 points, so.
Juliet, was there a reason that you put us at approaching rather than meeting?
Yeah, I am driving right now and I can't pull it up.
Please don't.
Please
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
pull it
please
up.
don't.
Well, I mean, it would be easy for one to get hung up on the use of the word goals here in the community engagement, rather than just vision and goals.
Are we ready to move on?
We
to the-
technically didn't really meet that, but
So I think, before we leave this particular, I think we had talked about having a printout of the board goals to have
Yeah.
like at every board meeting. And
I like the idea.
just as a,
laminated at the dais.
yeah, but also sort of a 2-minute, aren't there, I think there's some boards that read them before every meeting, which I think is a little overkill, but just something to
Centering
start
ourselves in the
every
goals.
meeting with, we're here for kids, we're here for kids' social, emotional, and academic achievement. And that's why we have these goals, and that's why what we focus on.
I think that's a great idea. Sorry. I think that's a great idea. One of the things that I do think, in this, maybe going back to this community engagement, because the concept of growth is not how most parents think about that as an end goal. And I know why we did it. I think it's just, we have to take people through the process. So like the more we repeat and break it down, I think the more understandable it gets. But just in and of itself, I think people are going to be like, huh, what about proficiency? Like, you know, if my kid at grade level, you know, like they made a lot of growth, but maybe they're not at grade level. So thinking about how we talk about it and talk about it more frequently, I think then educates the whole community in a way that they're in the same place we are, versus those guys are off talking about one thing. And, you know, I'm just looking at my kid still not at grade level or, you know, advanced grade level.
I think it would be handy to have a 5-minute video translated into different languages. That the board goal around growth versus proficiency and why we ended up with growth, but we want proficiency for all kids. And short of that, we want kids to be catching up to proficiency. And that's the growth that we're measuring.
You know, that could actually be pretty radical to like have a video and kind of do parent training, and especially before conferences, and say, these are your board's goals. These are our expectations for all of our children. And we hope your expectations for your children. Here are questions I mean, there's all sorts of resources about like questions to ask and all that. That would be pretty powerful, I think, because we don't communicate with our community in that way at all at this point.
And to Andrew's point, that is a difficult concept. It's very nuanced. But I feel like it's upon us to do that explaining in multiple languages. That education piece would be really valuable. And it's like parents, you want your own kids to do well. You know, it's like you want your own kids. If you have a kid that's failing like I did, you know, you're concerned about other people's kids, yes, but you're concerned about your own kid getting, you know, marching orders.
Can I just take a minute to, again, Julia, you sound fantastic. I just want to thank the technology team. Like, who's driving, like, your voice is very clear. It feels like you're right in the room with us. So thank you.
Yeah,
In a good way.
Thank you, Tara.
No,
Did you-
this is again.
Did you get new toys, Terry? Did you?
Yes, thank the people at Otis for, I did those.
That's the same simulcast thing that
That's
teachers
not
use,
happening for teachers, so this
Yeah.
is what the teacher setup is gonna be like.
Wow.
or a lot of teachers are using
And they
it.
are using them. So I hopped ahead to values and guardrails because I thought we were going there. And what's interesting is I'm reading this now, and what's hard for me about this rubric is that, you know, the not students outcome focus 0. Well, the board has adopted a vision, the board has adopted goals, and the board, we maybe haven't listened to the value, well, in the 24-month period. I think with the SAA stuff, we did do the value listening. So I would say, yes, we've done all of that, but we haven't adopted guardrails. So it's like we're between 0 and 5. So that puts us in this, that's one of the things I don't like about this. Like, we're not 0, but we're not 5. So we're like 2.5, or like on the line.
But we actually discussed adopting guardrails, and we made a very conscious collective decision not to.
Not to.
So I kind of threw that out in this
You did,
rubric.
okay.
And see,
I thought we just didn't do them versus we decided not to.
We talked
And
about
what's
it.
interesting is you went out in front on that one first, and then you walked it back this time.
I think it's because I'm like, well, we're not 0.
Yeah, we're not.
I don't recall us deciding not to do guardrails. I think we've talked about it. And for me, the way I understand it is that for now, we've decided not to do guardrails, but it might be something we choose to do. But like what I've come to understand, trying to read about it, is like basically our OSBA leadership things are guardrails. That we use the OSBA leadership standards, those are the guardrails in sort of a way. That's what the guardrails are intended to be. They're intended to be those pieces that we adopt that say we want the superintendent to be focusing on increasing the hiring of teachers of color. We want the superintendent to be focusing on communicating with community units. That's what the guardrails are designed to fill in the gap that we have filled in with the OSBA leadership guidelines. So that's my understanding.
With the addition of some metrics,
Right.
so that it would be, I mean, if there's I think an inherent conflict may be too strong, but there's a mismatch between doing some stuff through the council documents and other stuff through OSBA.
Yeah.
Because they've got a very different feel, very different kind of mindset. So the difference between the OSBA stuff and the guardrail stuff is that guardrails would have metrics established by the superintendent. The OSBA stuff is much more subjective. It's, how are you feeling about it? What do you think? And, we'll get information from the superintendent, but we haven't established any kind of markers, thresholds. So,
one of our guardrails could be, hiring and retention of staff of color, or like that. What I would like to see us do is look at the OSBA leadership guidelines and turn those into 3 or 4 guardrails and have that be what we do for next year's evaluation.
Yeah.
So that we have
I like
metrics
that too.
attached.
I like that too.
Because I think, the subjective thing makes it hard, but having the clear metrics, I think would make it
Yeah.
meatier, yeah.
And what I wrote down is we have informal guardrails. Like
Yeah.
we had these sessions earlier where Rita said, bring your guardrails, and no one did. So
Yeah.
that said to me, like the board wasn't really that interested in applying them because we
Right.
had an opportunity to bring
Right.
it forward and no one really did. We do have the informal guardrails. And I think you're right. It's better to be transparent about that and more fair to the superintendent to be really clear. Diversity of educators and senior staff is something that this board has said we are focused on and we're going to evaluate you on. So why don't we adopt that as a formal guardrail?
Right.
Formal guardrail. As you improve,
Yes.
as you meet these student-centered goals, you need to also, not do so, not, increase the diversity.
And a guardrail could be also where if we did want to have something to say about the equity director role, that a guardrail is where we could say
Yeah,
something.
it's funny. The other one I had was focusing on racial equity and social justice as a guardrail. Also, give it. That's harder to quantify, but it's possible. If we work
I
on
think
it.
you could quantify it.
So, and that would, again, it's up to the superintendent to say, this is how I'm gonna meet
But
this.
he's the quantifier.
He's
Right.
not-
Yeah,
Not our job to do that.
Great point.
He
And I
has to tell
love-
us ahead of
And
time.
I
what they
love
are.
that. Like
Yeah.
that was a really key thing from this, that our job is to set the goal and his job is to tell us how far we can go and how he's gonna get there.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that, because it should be worked on together.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the
Well,
other.
and I don't know about any of you, but I'm not an instructional expert. And so some of this is like, I wouldn't have the skills to set what a reasonable goal on some of these things would be. And so that's why we hired someone who's really smart on that. But it does need to be collaborative.
And I do think if you go that direction, there's a couple of these that we have heard over and over again from the community, from students, and parents. The diversification of the workforce is one of those that we've heard in every venue consistently. So to me, that's, board uses a process that includes students, parents. Oh yeah, I mean, for that guardrail, it's there.
And it's in the strategic plan, so.
And I think that's what, I think if everything is interconnected, then that also helps with staff capacity, right? That they're not trying to do 80 million things, they're all linked, it's all driving towards the same student outcomes, I think. Monitoring and, are we ready to move on to monitoring and accountability?
Oh, yeah, this is the one. I know you're here for last year's minutes, so I need to go back to last year's notes. I do like the idea of tracking board time, so I am really glad, and thank you, Roseanne. I haven't looked at it.
Oh, good Lord, did you not, so we were scheduled to have 43 hours worth of meeting and we had 107 hours worth of meeting.
But I
Wait,
Oh.
say that again. Where do you
Look
see
at the
that?
top of this.
43 and 107.
Allotted time,
Yeah.
43.6 hours,
Yep,
total time, 107.4.
yep.
I don't see the,
I think Kara can believe it. I think Roseanne can
Oh, I
believe
see.
it.
Okay.
Total time spent.
yikes.
Yeah, and you know what
Just 6
crap is
64
terrible?
extra hours.
We're digressing, but I don't know about that 30 minutes on student outcomes, because all of our board goal stuff is about student outcomes.
Okay, this is board meeting time.
No, I know. Oh, so this is just in this past year?
It doesn't
This is
include our
just this
retreat.
past
Right,
year
right.
of
Just
board
this
meetings.
past year.
When did we spend
November
anything?
through June 15th.
I think-
just this year.
Yeah.
You know, what's hard in coding it is there's like probably parts like within the superintendent's report that,
But that's not discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
That would be,
So-
it would be very difficult to track.
Yeah.
So Roseanne, thank you. I mean, I know this is a
Well,
huge
then the
project, and
majority-
Sarah.
But also, this was a weird year,
Yes.
you know?
Okay, so,
Absolutely, but-
so I.
But we,
Andrew-
because we
Andrew
were much
was
better,
saying something
we were
about
much
this,
better
so.
before this year, at least
Well,
for
I-
one year.
We spent
2
63
years.
minutes total on
I
student
don't know if
outcomes.
we were.
Well, I
We were more than 30 minutes, I will grant you that.
63.
You know,
know that we made
more
a,
than that. But,
Unbelievable.
but I would hazard a guess not by much.
well, I know we made a dramatic shift, like 18, 19. We were
Monitoring
paying attention.
accountability, I
No,
think
we
it's also
didn't.
linked to school.
But
Right.
It
The point I've been trying to make for a while now is we never made that pivot.
Well, I mean, we improved and we were aware of it, but was nowhere near what it needed to be. Because we were before that, just like in crazy adult land 100% of the time.
Regardless,
Anyway,
how are you gonna structure this for next year? It will be easier to be on that regular schedule, like pretty early October, I'm guessing, or maybe late October, you'll get the first map. Because I think they wanna do map pretty early out of the gate,
Yeah, they do.
to see where everybody is. So that should be a good, at least half hour right there to get you on your way. And then,
So, I mean, I think we're all in agreement on the need to spend more time there. I will say, my notes from last year, so I'll repeat it again, but I still believe it. I don't think the goal of spending 50% of our board time monitoring goal, I think that's too high.
yeah,
And I mean, you know, literally, I'm trying to think, even if we set to 43 hours, I mean, spending 22 hours, you know, monitoring board goals. I mean, there's only a certain, I mean, you get to a certain point of like, okay, you've already seen the data, we need to see it again, right? Or talk about it. So I do think we need to increase that time. I think this arbitrary 50%, I could throw that out in terms of a rubric. And then the other thing is this also says that anything not legally mandated or part of the goal monitoring is by definition superintendent's work. I don't think that's true.
I totally agree.
And I, you know, for me, like, part of what we do here is representative democracy, and we're presenting information as well as pomp and circumstance to the public, and there's actually value in that work. And I'm saying this to someone who doesn't have that, so I hope you all know that, right?
But
Like,
doesn't let.
He doesn't like to
love
do the
it.
proclamations and
But I
like,
also
he doesn't.
He doesn't like to
I
spend
see
time on
how
that
important-
stuff.
He knows it's important.
Birthdays.
And I will even just take, I'll take a.
Telling Scott how great he
For a
is.
second, because, you know, our conversation last night about how we're gonna have a calendar for every single, you know.
Which, by the way, we always have had. That bugged me last night.
That we
Because we've had a
I would
calendar.
like to-
We don't have a calendar.
We
I mean,
have-
of,
For proclamations.
Can I finish, just because I just.
And
I-
for
this is gonna be
honoring
an
special
unpopular
months and
opinion,
stuff.
but I
That
quickly
was
need to
annoying.
say it. And,
stepping aside.
I think I would love to have a conversation with the board moving forward about the value of that time for two reasons. One, once you start saying we're gonna recognize everything, it's a lot. And I mean, if you're every single month, you could be spending easily 45 minutes to an hour on proclamations, which are not student-centered. And I think there is a very loose connection between that and people's sense of belonging and engagement, but there are other ways we could spend that time. I wonder whether there's a better way to do that that doesn't involve every single meeting having one,
Can
two,
I-
3 proclamations.
I
can I speak to that?
Yeah.
If you guys don't mind. Yeah, so the purpose is to get the totality and then make decisions about what we're going to honor and be intentional about it, because frankly, it's completely random about what ended up. Like, you know, AAPI, which we have a very significant population in PPS, and you know, it just slipped off the calendar. And so it's not that we have to do them all. The point is to look at the totality and then decide what we're gonna do and what we're not gonna do. But it doesn't mean we have to do them all. People, like, they were really very clear, like, they had to recognize Juneteenth. They're like, why didn't the board do that? I was like, I don't know. So
I think that what we focus on says everything about us, and I feel like I don't want to be part of an organization that doesn't recognize people. Trans Day of Remembrance is, LGBTQ Pride Month, Juneteenth. These are things that make people that are othered in society feel seen. And I literally wouldn't want to work for an organization or volunteer for an organization that didn't value the diversity, especially as we're talking about valuing diversity. We do that by recognizing that not everybody's white and not everybody's male and able-bodied and straight.
And I agree with you so strongly that recognizing is important. I sometimes often feel that the resolutions we do are more performative than real.
Yeah.
And so for me, the question is, are we better off actually, instead of a proclamation around Trans Day of Remembrance, where we say it and 10 people watching on YouTube think, oh, that's nice, they did it. Are we better off actually thinking, what are our policies around transgender students? What are we doing to support
Outcomes.
them? What are the outcomes? You know what I mean? Like,
Do all of our principals have all of this information about, events to recognize this month and to reach out to their own communities about?
We can
And
also shorten how we show it. We don't, I've actually read like the Black History Month was like, it's pages. And you're like going through like a Bible. I don't think it needs to be a 45-minute thing. I really think that
but not
we could
And it can link
recognize
to our
and
website.
move forward.
And it kind of gets back to, Julie, I want to agree. I love the idea of being deliberate about what we're doing. And so, I think yes, let's have that conversation as a board about how we do it, how we show up, and yes.
So I was gonna suggest, and what was it, the AAPI students? It's the, Julia, you were the LG.
are you talking about last night? It was the LGBTQ plus students.
Screw the proclamation. We want something where we're participating.
Yeah, they were like very strong. In fact, the staff who were representing the students said, please don't pass a, worthless, a resolution that doesn't mean anything. They're like, we'd much rather not have a resolution and actually have some dialogue around, what we're, what our concerns are and issues. So I think there's like the conversation that just happened. I think there's alignment. It doesn't have to be a resolution, but just saying we're not going to do anything, and then some creep in because once somebody knows somebody on the board that gets a resolution, or the staff put one on, and then it becomes very subjective. So it's a broader conversation that we should have about what we, what the honoring and celebrating looks like, and how we do that. At one point, we talked about just posting resolutions like as you walk in, so that like during that month, it's a visible display, or they're at the schools. And so there's lots of different other ways to do it besides using board time.
And in some ways, instead of, and doing it because it's Black History Month, or doing it, I'd rather see us kind of mix up the calendar so that it's not, this is the month, so we'll, salute the flag this month. I'd rather see it almost get off calendar, but to do a much more meaningful student engagement. Here's a program at Roosevelt, or the AAPI students at Roosevelt have been very vocal about safety. Mm-hmm. So, regardless of the calendar, when there's a resolution, getting input or feedback from the Roosevelt students next year about, okay, administration responded with a bunch of things. How's that look on the ground? And hear from administration and from students. That's one example. Or for a different demographic, or our Native students. Hearing from them. I don't think we've had a presentation on, it's in the strategic plan, but specific programs of how we're trying to connect and support Native students and families. I don't think we've had that kind of focus, and yet it's our goal that we talk about all the time. I'd rather see it that rather than reading a proclamation to see something on the ground, this is what we're doing.
We can't move Juneteenth though, because that's in June.
It took a long time to get it.
You can't put that in March.
Yeah, let's just, on any of the proclamations, let's not take 15 minutes for it.
Agreed.
Or you guys.
At best.
Well, I think the point of the calendar is to say Juneteenth is coming. Who wants to work on that? To have the whole, and Amy, I'm sorry if there was a calendar in the past, I mislaid that
We
somehow.
just had a tracker that had almost,
Yeah.
most of the things.
Right, and it came up with AAPI month, and Julie's like, why didn't we do anything for that? And I was like, because nobody brought anything forward, like,
Yeah,
in the past of the proclamations, it's been, Rosanna said it's Hispanic Heritage Month, or it's,
yeah.
Black History Month, and so we have this proclamation, but I think, like you said, there's so many things like Trans Day of Remembrance or other pieces, and I think, I
Some
like
people
what
have a
Scott's
week, some
saying.
people have a day.
Right, like how do we celebrate our students who are leaders on these things?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so instead of just like a bunch of us at a desk saying, oh, we support, gay kids, like what are our kids doing to like be the models of inclusive?
That's great.
The Milwaukee Juneteenth, there were so many like Milwaukee high school students, high school students from that district speaking. Our church was involved with that one, so that's where we celebrated. But how do we celebrate our students here in PPS doing that? And we did have our Juneteenth, but the proclamation could lift up, or the whatever we do
Yeah.
could lift
Yeah.
up our student voices. I think that's why we want to have a calendar. That's why we want to have a couple board members on it to prepare for that, so we can really do that work of let's celebrate every day.
I think you guys are gonna need a calendar writ large.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna have to include not only these recognition days, it's gonna have to include all of the graduation stuff. Last 2 years, almost none of the normal graduation things have happened. In a normal year,
Oh yeah.
there's the recognition
Yeah.
of, the
The multicultural.
all the
Yeah.
multicultures that
And the art stuff. too.
biliteracy.
That's
Yeah.
different
I mean,
celebration.
there's a whole range of celebrations of students, none of which have happened for 2 years. And I have to say, when I was chair, all of those things came as a like, oh my God.
Yeah,
So all of that stuff should be on a calendar. And every single year, everybody should know when it's happening.
Didn't some of those celebrations
And-
get put together, like the Black Excellence, and didn't we have one big All-Stars gala to
Yes.
celebrate them all?
Yeah, but I mean,
'Cause we used to
however
have
it's gonna
young black
happen,
kids
it
did in
should be
black
known
and-
in
But
January, what's gonna happen in May.
some of it has happened at board meetings. And the question is, do you want to offload that into a celebration that isn't taking board meeting time or not?
Or also, it's way better for the kids to come to a meal with art and then to
Yeah.
come to a board meeting, right? Like with their family, so.
you mean something that's actually fun?
So the
Board
other
meetings
thing,
are fun.
the other thing I think that needs to be
Here.
on the calendar is a monitoring calendar for the
I'm like,
student outcome
I'm
data.
here right now.
Yes, that monitoring calendar is in here.
But I mean, that's, and we have never had that.
I mean,
We
it's in
did,
the,
we put, well, that was before we had our board goals, but, and I believe that not only with the monitoring calendar, we should have, like, our agenda should track by our board goals. So even if we're not like specifically monitoring progress, but if we're having, the staff is presenting something on dyslexia, that
should be in there.
tracks, no pun intended, to our 3rd grade reading goal.
Yeah.
Or it's in service to our understanding. So, there's not very much that should be on our agenda that you can't directly connect to one of our board goals.
So what happened to our calendar that we used to have?
Well, so we haven't had it for our board goals because we haven't had the opportunity to monitor our board goals because,
so we had on the calendar things like quarterly report on progress, and we didn't have any data.
Yeah.
So there's.
Well,
Well, actually,
we did have some of the progress reports, but not all the ones that were scheduled, because we only had one round of math testing. this
But we
year.
also had a mismatch
years.
between our monitoring expectations and the availability of our data, which we need to fix.
So.
well, the other thing is that we do have data. We can take an opportunity this summer. We're going to have data from the high schools on those,
Oh, yeah.
AP AP, IB, dual credit, and
So-
kids earn their seal of biliteracy. So we should, it's going to be data with an asterisk, but we should get back on track and look at that this summer.
Yeah. So Roseanne, can you make a note of sometime this summer to add to the agenda, that high school data?
So, so Roseanne, when you were categorizing things, if we had, so we had a couple of workshops on, I think we had one on tag.
Yeah, so all those study
Yeah.
sessions that we had.
The study sessions, did you categorize those? We had the ethnic studies, study session.
No, this is just for board meetings,
Yeah.
not for study sessions.
Okay, so
Okay.
study
So the
session.
study sessions are not counted in this tracking. It's just the board meetings, right, Roseanne? Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, that's,
So you didn't get credit for that.
Yeah, we didn't get credit for that towards the.
I actually
Yeah.
could get that data.
That would
No, that would have doubled our hours.
Yeah.
so I gotta say, oh, it's not a board meeting, it's a study session. That's semantics. I think if all,
We can have that.
if everybody's there, it's a board meeting. Yes, it's not a official governing session, but that's board time. And so it's in the future, count that and decide ahead of time, this is a study session on dyslexia, or on ethnic studies, or whatever. Yeah, we're gonna put it in this is related to our goals or not. And so, figure out ahead of time so that when you get to the end of the year, you're not having an argument.
And I just want to say, as we talked through all this and what we want to do next year and what we're thinking about, I just want to say a huge thank you to Rita for being the one to take on board development this year and spearhead that. Because, when I came on as chair, that was a piece that I was like, this is more than I want to be able to do. And so to be able to ask her to say, can you take the lead on, we as a board have agreed that we're going to do our self-eval, and then we're going to do this work that we agreed on at our self-eval in August. And so to have her be the spearhead of that has been really, really helpful, and reminding me of, okay, we need to schedule another board retreat so we can work on these things that we're talking about, and to constantly be keeping that and helping us get better. And then your passion for this governance work, which has led you to do the Council of Great City Schools coaching, I think has been a huge asset to us in how do we continue our board development.
And you were also doing this, not just this, like you're
Right.
doing it with some other really intense processes, like the guiding coalition. It's not like you mix something like kind of an easy thing with this.
Or other major pieces.
Or other major pieces.
Michelle, I wasn't sure if I saw you packing up or not, but I just wanted, if you were, I thought maybe, because I know you said you're gonna, and I just wanted to see if there were any overarching thoughts before you left. Just wanted to-
Thank you. I just,
And I don't mean to push you out if you weren't.
yeah, no, do I need to leave? No, I do need to leave. I'm trying to get to a story before it closes.
Yeah,
I was looking at my own scores where they moved, which was in the monitoring and accountability. They moved from not student focused to approaching, and then I'm pretty sure everything else, and also unity and trust.
Values and guardrails on that too.
And values and guardrails, yeah. So I was just, I'm not being super pessimistic about where we're at, but this is also, for me, it's so subjective. It'd be really interesting once Gary and Herman start to kind of see where they land on some of these things. Again, because that diversity of thought can get us closer to right into the bell curve, but yeah. I think what I like about it, it's got I like this piece that shows us kind of where we're at, and yeah, I had a hard time scoring just in general, just because I felt like we were on the line in a couple of areas. I definitely would love to put some attention on guardrails, on like codifying those guardrails. I think would be really, really great.
so we're going.
So I have an observation looking at this. And I don't know if sounds like maybe a break anyway. looking at the scoring sheet, the one thing that I think is really interesting, and like, thank you, Ailey, for being like the optimist and the believer in the unity and trust. But it's interesting, like that's the only one in which like everybody's in the same box.
But that is because there was something super prescriptive in the,
Is that really?
so,
Okay, unity and
uh,
trust.
I love Ailey as the leader.
Well,
Bringing
I
us to-
before, I thought we were between that meeting and mastering, but I apparently am not in alignment with everybody else.
So,
This is
No,
unity.
I like that. You know, sometimes
must
people
be
have
the-
to pull us somewhere else.
Because I think we did the board has included language. It's not in our ethics and conflicts, but it is in our protocols. So I guess I took ethics and conflicts and put it as protocols instead.
So I continue to have issues with how the Council of Peers of Schools defines ethics and conflict of
Yeah.
interest. They lump governance and board protocols in with ethics and conflict of interest.
Right.
They're very separate issues, which
Yeah.
makes it really hard for me. If I'm being, fair with the rubric, we don't need some of this stuff, but I also don't think so.
And I felt like we made decisions around, we were not gonna have our ethics statement say some of what they said, because it was like around if anyone's giving you money, you can't make a decision on them, which, a lot of us have got money from PAT or, from, like different.
If you run for.
Or not.
Right.
I mean, you could literally do a shoestring campaign, for like $500. You're still taking money from someone who has an
Right.
interest,
Right.
in
Right.
the district.
Yeah.
Because they're
somebody
parents
who
of
works
school.
for one of our culturally
Yeah,
specific partners.
they're kind of getting at like the problem with American democracy here, but we're not going to solve it.
it's
Right,
campaign
right.
finance is
So I
a whole
think-
other.
And because we separated the ethics and the protocols, like I scored this with that understanding of what we had decided as a group. I think that's part of why mine's so high. Or I'm just a huge freaking optimist, Julia, which is also true.
Yeah, I actually was really close. When I'm looking at my scores, I was really close to being a 3.
Yeah.
I actually wrote that in my notes. I said, I think we're getting to, approaching, given some of the governance conversation. So I was definitely close.
Yeah, so I think I was like a 3+ because we haven't done all the stuff in 5, but we've done some of it. Like I think we all have memorized the goals, but I don't think I know the status of each. And some of those pieces, I think, we're getting there on this one, I think, but obviously again.
It's that dumb line at the top that gets you every time.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you that everything that's there, we pretty much have done, but not everything in the column that
The
came
next
before it.
one.
No, prior.
Oh,
You
not
have to
everything
meet
there.
that and.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why, the
That makes
silly
sense.
rubric problem. It's very
That makes
prescriptive.
sense. So we kind of jumped over communications and collaboration. Did we have thoughts there?
So again, just repeating some of the things from last year. This is one where I think, first of all, the title, the title communication and
Bye, Michelle.
collaboration doesn't really match what they're talking about here. So again, I think that's just strange. But to get to mastering, they're saying that there are no more than 2 board authorized public meetings per month, and that includes committee meetings.
Right.
So
They're hardcore.
I honestly think that's bad.
I do
And
too.
frankly, if I were sitting in a spot where I could actually influence the Council of Peers schools, I would tell them, this is messed up.
Yeah.
And I get where they're trying to go, which is that having meetings that last forever, tons and tons of different meetings is also bad governance, but so is too many.
Right.
And I don't think they found a good medium there. What I wrote this comment here though, what I think is interesting about in mastering this is that as I'm reading through it, it doesn't necessarily mean that board members aren't actively engaged in briefings and discussions outside of board authorized meetings. This is very, very focused on our board meetings. And I think that's an interesting for us to talk about, right? Like when we talk about taking these meetings that are going until 10, 11 midnight and getting them to 8 or 9, some of that is also just board members maybe engaging in briefings or other discussions outside of the board meeting, and then not feeling like we have to rehash the same thing in a board, right?
Right.
And if we can keep the board meetings really focused on what are we approving, what are we communicating, what's the message, like I think the rubric is kind of getting to that. And it doesn't mean we're not involved or aware of those other things. They're just not happening during the board.
Yeah, but I mean, to be honest, if you think about the time we spent, a lot of it is not in service to even decision-making on that. It's more performative.
So this is one place, so we're talking about communication and collaboration. If you look at this, we spent 49% of board meeting time on things that would fall, we think, sort of shoehorn under this category.
Some of it's like briefing and updates from staff, right?
But a lot of this is the one category I think where it really does help to look at the spreadsheet. Because a lot of the things that come under this category were things like the renaming stuff.
Yeah.
Any proclamations. So it's kind of a catch-all category. But I think it's worth doing some, and I haven't had the time to actually do any analysis.
All the reopening stuff.
That goes under COVID, I think.
Yes, so okay, so let me explain what this thing is.
Oh, I-
So you have, under monitoring and accountability, that includes stuff like budget and all that. It also includes student outcomes.
COVID reopening is under communications.
It's under, yes, so the student outcomes in COVID are nested under the bigger category that's above it, okay? But like COVID was only 12%. So it doesn't account for all of the other time that's spent doing communication.
But that's not COVID reopening, that's just COVID,
Well, it's COVID reopening, it's COVID reopening.
like COVID health data, because we had briefings on like health too.
The briefings don't count, it's just what, I mean, anything that was coded as COVID stuff.
I'm trying to unpick yours because I'm touch screen.
It was already filthy.
Yeah, I know.
And
I'm trying to
it's-
remove stuff.
It may be worth taking a deeper look at the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. Because we spend half of our time on this category,
Well, a
and
lot
that
of that
was
is.
50 hours.
Yeah.
Want me to put it up?
Anything. No, I mean, we're
Yeah,
okay,
it's-
we got
it's-
it.
I really like the idea, like in the third column, board skills and work 5 topics for discussion during the board authorized public meeting. I like the idea of focusing, right? And it gets back to this calendar idea we've been talking about, and that, it's, we've had it for the last couple of years.
Right.
It's sort of like, what are we doing throughout the year? We don't always stick with it, but, having that sort of arc of what are we trying to get at each board meeting?
Yeah.
And really limiting it to that, and
Yeah.
being willing to limit that, because I think that also helps us with our communication. This communication helps the public understand what we do.
Yeah.
So it's not just 10 random things. It's actually, there are 3 things that are really connected to one another.
I also think this is tangentially related. It would be good to have a little bit of time after the superintendent's report. Like, I would advocate for the superintendent's report being slightly more topical, and then a brief opportunity to like ask questions and stuff, because I think people are looking for ways all through our meeting time to kind of interject questions about relevant things that, we just feel like we need more information about. So I don't know, I'd like to see how we could use that vehicle a little better.
Maybe to have a conversation.
Just a little bit, and because I know when I learn something new from those reports, I always have questions.
We might want to consider doing something like that for the student reps report as
For
well.
sure, yeah.
But I mean, we definitely want to have a set protocol in place, so it's not just off the.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so continuous improvement. Are we talked enough about unity and trust?
I'm going to say something about that last topic, and I actually had said quite a bit, but I guess I realized I was on mute. That on the calendar, it's having 4 or 5 big topics. I think it's a great idea, Andrew. and a solid practice. One of the things we just need to have like this continuous conversation, and Roseanne and Kara kind of being the interface with the rest of the staff, because I think what happens a lot of times is like we settle like, yeah, those are the big 3 issues. And then it's like, oh, but we have to approve these 4 things. And so then we get like just these huge agendas. And so, you know, trying to get staff to anticipate, or like when we plan something big, to not have it conflict with something that's just like a mandatory need to do now. So I think elevating sort of the communication and looking to the board office staff to really help us do that, I think will make a big difference.
All right, interim goals or continuous improvement. I read the word interim goals and then said that. Okay. Got my sermon still tonight, and based on how my brain's functioning right now, it's gonna be a good one. Okay.
I tried to do a sort in the Google spreadsheet.
You deleted it?
Hey, Julia, thanks for joining me in my column.
That's not just me.
I'm sorry, on what?
You were like minus, but you were still in the approaching column with me, where everybody else is. How come Julia got 1 minus and you and Michelle got 0 plus, Rita?
Because if it was 50% of the score or above, I did it as a minus of the above.
Yeah.
If it was below 50%, then
Did it as a plus.
We need a key.
I mean, I think I thought we were column 1, but I thought we could get to column 2 pretty easily. I did have a question. Do we want to track the average annual cost of staff time invested in governance? I mean, I love the concept. The only tracking staff time itself.
Take staff time.
Okay, can I,
So,
let me, I was thinking about this, so it's kind of a rule of thumb, if you're preparing for a class, you figure 3 hours prep time for every hour.
Of course, everyone follows that.
Well, no, but I mean, it's a rule of thumb. So, which I think is extremely conservative, because that would just be one person's 3 hours of one person.
Right.
And to prep for any of these meetings, it is an all hands on deck. But okay, let's even just take that 3 to 1. So if we've got 107 hours sitting in front of the camera, multiply that by 3, that's 300 hours. That works out to a 40-hour week, 7.5 40-hour weeks.
Why by 3?
Huh?
Times,
Multiply by
if
3.
it's 3 hours of prep per hour.
Oh, got it.
Right.
So are you talking about for staff? Or-
Yeah, for staff.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, just to be clear, I think we should also do a similar calculation for board members.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, before the summer contracts got on, that packet was 781 pages.
Yep, that's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
And so it's not just one group that's like,
No, we're
Thanks.
not saying, I think
We're not saying, okay, my point is not that we are all overburdened. That's my point. And I don't even want to tell you what my schedule has been like this month. Okay? Believe me, you don't want me to tell you.
but we're talking about staff time because it's
But
in
we're
the rubric.
talking, right. I'm just saying, we are spending collectively an enormous amount of time,
No question.
money, and resources on these meetings. And these hours don't even account for committees or briefings or anything else. So I think the only point here
Or answering
is-
emails.
Or answering, the point is, right now, this is not sustainable, and I would argue it's not sustainable for anyone. Which means that going forward, the board is gonna have to think long and hard about how you wanna spend your time, how you wanna spend staff's time, and what you wanna focus on.
I
That's it.
agree.
Any other thoughts on the continuous improvement piece?
Yeah, just, the tracking. I think that was the deal killer if we were being faithful to the rubric.
So we aren't tracking regularly, we're sort of just doing year-end tracking.
Yeah, but we do hit some of the other items in the other columns.
I think it's kind of bizarre. They include as like on one of the highest rated whether like we get our meeting materials 7 calendar days early.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again about, I think when there's focus, if we're focusing and we have the calendar
And predictability.
and predictability, then, I mean.
Oh, I think it's great. I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, and I know that's one of your huge values usually is to have stuff ahead of time, but it is a facet of a healthy system that when things are sort of predictable like that.
In the last column regarding orientation, I would like to know more about what we are and are not doing for our incoming board members. Because that has not been there's room for improvement in that
Yeah,
process.
so Roseanne has run that process this time around. Do you want to share any, Roseanne, about what's been happening with the onboarding of new board members?
So we are breaking it into kind of different chunks. So instead of in the past, the feedback I heard was that bringing people in, orient them to the various departments was not really helpful, or
We just get this fire hose of information in like one day.
yeah, and not necessarily need for it to start the day one necessarily. And so this year we'll be doing like a board office, hopefully, I think Friday, a meeting with Mr. Kermit, hopefully Gary, to introduce them to the mechanics of the board office, how to get information, how to do staff requests, things like, I think more of the how-to. And then they'll be meeting with Jonathan to talk about vision, and Danny to talk about racial equity, social justice, and then small group meetings with the ELT.
Right.
Throughout the summer, so it's not a 3-day sit in the seat.
And will they still get the same type of like briefing book about each of the departments and the
This is the
functions?
best part, and you guys will get this too. It's a virtual book now,
Great.
so you can have, it'll be
But
updated,
it's updated with like org charts and,
so that you won't have an outdated book.
yeah, great.
And similar opportunities are being provided to Jackson.
They'll have the same book and the same workbook and how to send out meeting packets and things like that. But we don't send out meeting packets. Provide information.
Sounds like an improvement.
You follow right there with continuous improvement, Roseanne. Trying to make it better for board members, thank you. All right, what else, Rita? No, so I think, it's really up to the next set of board leadership to sort of look at this self-eval and what, and again, with the new board members, one of the directions to take for board development and how we're gonna shift things like the agenda and all those pieces. And I would say, somebody said something, I don't know if it was Amy or Rita, or somebody said something, I'm like, I don't take any of this personally. I feel like as board chair, I built upon the amazing stuff that Amy had done, Rita before her, Julia before her, and tried to like get us a little further down the road. And obviously not perfect at it. I somehow managed to lose some of the calendar pieces, but That then, the next chair builds on that and helps us as a board continue to develop and thrive and get better. And that's the continuous improvement cycle. And so I never take it personally when there's any criticism of what happened this year, or, I'm probably the first to make a list, besides my ridiculous optimism on unity and trust, a list of all the ways that we could have been better, that I had intended to have us be more faithful to our goals, and that just slipped through my fingers like sand.
Well, okay, I'm gonna keep in mind,
Now that you opened that door.
Yeah, please
that's
make the list.
17 things I'd like to.
Yes, I welcome the feedback, and then I'll, we'll have a conversation.
this was by any measure
I
extraordinary.
think how many people,
So cut yourself free.
Yeah, I think I did great, just not perfect.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is, I have a very strong suspicion that if we went back and we tallied up all of, if we did the same kind of tracking for board meetings for the 3 previous years, I'm gonna make a guess that we will not be that far off. Because we have long-standing patterns. And they reasserted themselves, especially this year, I think. I do think it's been much harder to do anything around student outcomes for obvious reasons. But if we look at the previous 2 years, when we were allegedly making a pivot, we really didn't.
We try. I mean, I think Amy, I do think.
Well, we weren't meeting weekly.
We weren't meeting weekly.
We weren't scheduling executive sessions at 11:30 at night.
I mean, I think we're learning this tool, and I think we're making progress, and I think we made progress the year before, and we made progress this year. We're not there yet.
I do think
My
we're,
only point is, it's gonna be, these are long-standing patterns that predate us. I mean,
but I
a lot
also,
of us have been going to board meetings for decades, and the patterns persist.
I totally agree with you, but I also think that, the development of our board goals was critical.
Yes.
And we knew we wanted to do it before we had the capacity to do it, which means before Russ got here, or, we were chomping at the bit when he was here for like a week. Because us wanting to do that, it wasn't possible.
But
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that that's part of the march. And I've said this a bunch of times, that's one of my great sadnesses of this year, that I think if this had been a normal year, I really do believe that we would have seen some progress in our.
I agree. I agree too.
Yeah.
Well, I think.
I'm not criticizing anybody here.
No, I know.
It's an observation.
Well, and I do think we're trying to make cultural change. We're making, and that takes time and intentionality, and we're working on it.
Yeah.
And for it to be real, it's hard work.
And Rita, to your point about the amount of time that it takes, the issue of our staff burnout is really real, especially, and also in particular as it pertains to care and feeding of the board. And it's not helping us with anything, and it's not helping us further our own goals.
Yeah.
So we need to really be open about discussing that and how we do things differently with that in mind.
And I've got to,
we did have 5 meetings in the last 3 days.
Yeah.
And that's, I canceled the audit committee meeting because it's we can't have 6 meetings.
Yeah.
So it's just part of that is, even if we just meet, there's a lot of, look at all the time that Roseanne spent and Kara, preparing to support us in the meeting. So, I think we have to be careful about all of them, even if hey, staff doesn't have to come, there is a impact on them.
but some of that was meetings that should have happened a month or 2 ago got rescheduled, unscheduled, rescheduled again. And there's an end of the year timeline where stuff had to happen. And that's why on my last And your last school part.
We just didn't, we wanted to get every moment we could out of the two of you.
Yeah.
All right, is there, again, as we think about honoring staff time, is there anything else before we wrap up?
I would, again, loving the list that Roseanne put together. I think an exercise would be to go through and say, okay, in this 4-hour meeting, what would we give up? to Get it down to 3. Yeah, cut an hour.
All of the time that Andrew talked.
Well, part of that's agenda setting, so that's actual
That's 2 hours.
items that are included that don't need to be included, and then part of it is just yappity yap.
Yeah, but that's also a protocol then to give your chair the power to say, discussion time's over.
Yeah.
And to set up discussion so that, I mean, you know, in Congress, it's like, you get your 3 minutes, you get your 3 minutes, and it's limited that way. So you got your 3 minutes, you better get it done, because that's it.
Yeah.
And I would, go ahead.
So anyway, some kind of facilitative techniques like that.
Okay, no.
Yeah, if it was structured, like say in Congress, where there's a specific amount of time for each person, I think that could be good. But if it's just cutting down the amount of time in general, I'm worried that, say, like the student rep, where I sometimes feel a bit awkward in inserting myself.
Yeah.
I feel like I could just limit their time for
Some of the
the.
quieter voices.
Yeah, and I don't want that to happen.
No, I want to make sure everybody gets
Right.
a chance.
Although I would just add one dynamic is that when you give everyone time, sometimes they feel like they have to take it. And so
But-
there's a trade-off there of
I noticed that
giving
last.
everyone time
Yeah.
and
You call
limiting
that
it
Scott.
versus sometimes we don't need to go down the road. Sometimes like we should be, I agree with your point. The larger point I wanted to go is that we as a board have to support the chair in that. Because the chair cannot themselves limit debate if the majority of the board doesn't want to limit debate.
Well, and
So as a
that's-
board, we have to be willing, you know, we have to be in agreement.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
because I've tried to move us on sometimes and it's been like, we're not ready to move on. Okay, that's fine.
but making it more out there and say, we budget, you know, we're 20 minutes in to a half-hour length and we're still talking. Do you want to extend debate or discussion? And
Call the question.
My favorite thing is that when I've asked those questions, dead silence. Like, what do you all want to do? Okay.
well, then your job then is to say, okay, we're gonna move on to the next
Yeah.
item, or call the question.
Yeah.
Boom,
And that's what I
done.
try to do. Yeah.
I guess my final comment is, so we are doing this 9 months after the last one.
Yeah.
And there are lots of things that went into it, but basically, the council's recommendation is that
Corgan.
quarterly self-evaluations. A decision was made
To only do it once a year.
to, well, no, we were supposed to do it twice. a year.
Interim.
Oh.
But, and it was originally January and then that
We got
meeting got
pushed,
messed up
yeah.
and then, you know, and it blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so we are 9 months later. So I would say the next board is going to need to figure out whether you want to do a self-evaluation process. If so, then B, how often? And my only recommendation is, if you're gonna bother to do this, you need to do it often enough so that you get timely feedback, so you can course correct if you want to. Doing this at the end of a 9-month period
Mhm.
is just it's a historical flagellation.
So
mean,
I would
what do we-
Like BS back.
I would sync it up with the retreats then, because I don't want to just do like a silly meeting to do a rubric keep scoring. For me, what we report is we're doing quarterly retreats. We take 45 minutes to just quickly go through the scores, any high level comments, that kind of thing, along with the other.
And that was what was supposed to happen in January. So the quarterly retreats are something that we did because of this self-evaluation.
Can I throw out another idea? That
And again, that's up to the incoming leadership to decide if we're gonna have quarterly retreats, what that's gonna look
you know,
like.
I'm thinking about scheduling, and Roseanne and Kara spent an enormous amount of time trying to find time on people's schedules. that's not necessarily, I don't know about school boards, it's not necessarily normal, right? Governments usually
Set
say,
a meeting.
here's our year of meetings. This is when we're gonna have them. And elected officials sometimes miss those meetings. That's okay, right?
Yeah.
If you have a vacation or a conflict or a family event and you just can't make it, you miss the meeting. And I feel like that's a cultural change that would really help keep us on task, like and on schedule, and also save them probably, dozens of hours a year scheduling.
Well, in our,
And we could choose to do that. I mean,
but like our
we could
committees, we
choose to
can
have-
schedule the whole year. We
Yeah.
should schedule the whole year. We
And
used to do it.
I mean, that's what we did in the audit committee, and it seems like the places where we get in these loops are like the one-off meetings where like we need an executive session or complaint or something that's not the normal, but we certainly should be able to set all of our committee meetings and all of our regular board meetings. And then I think it's like, here's when it is. And if you have to miss it, you miss it. But it's more these like, oh, we've got to do, add another one in, and it just makes it, because somebody needs it. That's the thing where a place where you get to solve, because if you get all the committees doing it,
And
you've
we
got
tried to
80% of the meetings.
We tried to set it that executive sessions were on the first meeting of the month. They were before the first meeting of the month, and then we did our study session at the second meeting of the month. That, worked for a while for part of the year, and then things kind of went off the rails. But that was sort of the plan, so that we built in time to the calendar. This was when we would do executive sessions. But then, all of a sudden we need one on bargaining here. But I do like that of let's set the schedule, and then this is when we're gonna have the quarterly retreats or whatever, if that's what the leadership decides to do.
Roseanne, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so I think that would be helpful. I think two things. I think we do have things that come up that we can't plan for, like a special meeting, zero complaint, something like that. It's really helpful to know the parameters, like is it the expectation that we only set it if every board member can attend? Is there, so I think it needs to be just from the board decision for staff to know, what is the threshold? Do we,
Quorum.
is it quorum? Is it as many as possible? The other thing is for executive sessions, I think if we're gonna start them, we only have once a month. And I know that for now that we're coming back into the world of being outside our houses and coming to it from work, it's hard to get here at 5, lots of people. So just a 45-minute executive session once a month, if that's all we're saying we're only gonna allow, then I don't know. I mean, that's kind of difficult.
So I might go a different direction, which is to actually schedule more meetings than we plan on using. So we have the board meetings, they all just came, thank you, Garrett, they're just moving next second. And, but then maybe we put a Thursday meeting on the calendar every other week.
Yeah,
And we don't
And just
use
hold
it,
it
but
down.
every one of us has it blocked out.
yeah.
And then when you have a special meeting or a complaint or an executive.
You've already got
session,
it.
it's.
That's when the Southeast Guiding Coalition meets.
What coalition?
And then-
Southeast Guiding Coalition.
Oh, so yeah, well.
And then if you don't have to use it, it's bonus.
Right,
Yeah.
but the other thing and I don't know how you schedule the special meetings or complaints and stuff, but like, are we giving too much flexibility to the,
Right.
filing the complaints? I mean, we, as a governing body, can say, we hear complaints on the first Tuesday of every.
Right,
Yeah, that's when we hear.
right.
Well, there is something in the complaint policy that you have to give 30 days after the request has to be heard by a certain time. So we usually allow for some time for staff to respond. Give us something before. So yes.
I
yes,
love-
There is some, so I think the idea of holding time on calendars that we can cancel.
I really like that.
Is a good idea. It would make it, if you do that 3 Tuesdays a month you hold, like 2 is a board meeting and 1 is a spare.
Yeah,
So I suggest if you really want to get the meeting time better under control, to do that self-monitoring, not a full-blown retreat, but a half hour ahead of the board meeting, have a, call it a work session, call it whatever. You can eat dinner through it, but just review, here's how we spent our board, the last 4 board meetings, last 2 months. Here's how we spent our time. Here's where we went over, here's here's how much we spend on each of these topic areas, again, which might rearrange, 50% on student absence might be too much, but oh my God, superintendent's report has been 50% of our meetings in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
I'm making that up, but just to do a bit of monitoring and then maybe say, okay, we're kind of violating what we set out to do here. What can we do about this? Is it just we got to suck it up, or is there a structural issue here that we need to be able to look at that? But to do very informal, but more often, especially early in the year, to help try to nail it down instead of going 3 months or 4 months and having it be, oh my God, this is not working. Yes.
One thing before we close, and I know I asked it earlier, but I guess I'd like to put it out there again, because I look at the sort of the template and the prescriptiveness of it, and I can't imagine we're the only district that looks at it and is like, yeah, they say we should be doing, X, but we have these other responsibilities by statute. And I'm wondering what other districts, instead of us, wringing our hands or like, we're not meeting the mark, like what is, is there a customization? Because I say, I can't believe other districts aren't wrestling with some of the same issues that we have. And it's not just that, we haven't been tracking, it's that the inflexibility, and that there are some things that I think are just frankly impractical about the tool. And instead of continuously every time we go through it, saying like, well, this just isn't practical, or we just can't do that, of customizing it. And what have other districts done? That's something I'd be interested.
Julia, I can pose that question this week.
That'd be great.
I knew of an institution that stuck strictly to this, and because they just focused up here at the 30,000 foot outcome level, they missed the whole stuff that was going on that blew up, because they were just tracking the outcomes and not how things were being carried out, and things blew up. All of a sudden you're in a hiring process, because the oversight was so focused on just one small part. Very good. Are we done there?
Well, I'd just like to say my thoughts, I guess,
Oh, yeah.
in the general rubric. Basically just echoing what others have said, but I think that it really is too rigid. I mean, just looking at our scores, it would seem that very, very few of us, if any, actually follow the directions all the way. If we were to, we basically get a 0 on all of them, I think. Because I mean, if you don't meet everything in the first column and the second, it's going to be a 0. And some of them, they're very specific. And I don't know if they're all necessarily the direction we should be going in. And I think, although a lot of them are great, and I think that we should also consider some factors that aren't here as well. But I mean, I don't have the complete picture, of course, but I think that we should consider actually building a self-evaluation framework that does take into account many of these factors, but others, and not in a way that relies on absolutes in the way that this one does. Because I feel that that is counterproductive, and it does not help us actually evaluate what we are doing. And we've kind of done that in our scores, but not really. So I don't know. I think that's something the next board should probably look into.
Yeah.
One thing we might want to think about as board members is to time ourselves. Is to, one of the practices in other places that I am in leadership, sometimes we have monitors that track and say, this is how much time each person spoke. Or we sometimes do it by, this is how much time white men spoke, this is how much
Yeah.
time Black women spoke. You know, that's a piece of also awareness that sometimes helps.
Yeah.
And I think we're not always as aware of how we're showing up in meetings. And I felt like this last year, we said a lot of nice things in our retreats about how we wanted to show up differently, and especially talking about time. And yet when it came to the meetings, we didn't want to change our behaviors.
Yeah.
So sitting in a meeting like this, we say a lot of things like how we want to show up differently, and then those ingrained practices come out and we continue the behaviors. And that's
There were any number of times where you tried to say, hey, we've got protocols.
Yeah.
And you got run right over.
Can we get those little chess clocks?
Yeah.
And when we talk, you hit it.
Or
When you're done talking, you start.
Yeah.
I was thinking about those.
Or if you want to hold your phone up to your microphone.
Yeah.
Hey, Ailey,
Yeah.
one question I had for you is, I thought a practice that you did, which was great, although we sometimes, between your church time and my work time, happened at the last minute. You called through and like, hey, is there anything on the agenda? And
Yeah.
I'd be interested in you, just like your feedback of like, hey, when you did the call through, like and then like when you got to the meeting, did people like the issues they flagged, like, hey, I've got a concern about X, or I'm going to ask about that. Did people actually do that? And like, was there something we could have done differently? Because like, hey, two people have said like, I don't have enough information, or I'm not comfortable there yet. So I'm just curious, like your own sort of feedback loop, whether there was like learnings from there that informed like how we could have done things different.
Yeah. I want to know the sarcastic thing Andrew was going to say first, though.
Oh, no, it was about the chess clock.
The chess clock.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
I thought the calling through the whole list of everybody was super helpful.
Yeah.
And except I didn't call Nathaniel, but I called the other board members. So is that why you're saying yeah?
No, I like the process.
Yeah, the process. Okay, I was like, I didn't call Nathaniel. I just realized maybe. No, because we normally talked on Mondays at 11. I had a standing meeting with Scott every Monday at 11, Julia. So he's complaining I didn't call him because we talked in the 11 o'clock meeting. So he's being legalistic here. But I thought it was really helpful because sometimes there would be like multiple board members asking the same question. So then I could be like, hey, Roseanne, I think we need to send out an email clarifying this. Or like if someone had a big concern, I could alert staff and they could prepare. So I think that saves time, that staff could be like, okay, this is going to come up. We need to be ready. So I actually thought it was really, really helpful as far as like meeting management for me to like have talked to everybody to just kind of get a sense of, was there something that people wanted to raise or needed questions answered about. So I thought that was really helpful. And that came from Roseanne, because the idea from that came from, I think it was Pam, who was it? The two people, the chair and vice chair, met with every board member quarterly, was it? Or once a month? Quarterly, I can't remember if it's quarterly or once a month, to just like check in. And so because it was COVID and we couldn't like take people for coffee, I just called everybody. And then the weekly updates I gave were Guadalupe's idea. To like give a weekly update of like things that were in the ether, that because one of the things people often say is, I don't know what's going on, you know, board leadership.
Or people are asking for the same
Right.
information. And
So it was just like every Wednesday, I'm going to tell you what I know. And sometimes it was like, I don't know much. Or sometimes it was like, I can't put it in writing, but there's some things that are coming. And sometimes it was, I was able to be much more like, here's what's coming, or here's something that's developing that you all need to know about. So I thought both those recommendations from Roseanne and from Guadalupe were really helpful to me as board leadership, and hopefully to the rest of the board.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that went really well. Like I felt at the end of the week, I really look forward to getting the update because I got new information.
Yeah.
You mean the superintendent's update?
Yeah, the superintendent, well, I'm going to say both things, the superintendent / Roseanne's. And then, so I learned new things. And then, like I say, Ailey calling around, I thought that was it was always a good reminder. Like usually by then I'd already sent off like either if I had some questions or concerns or had conversations, but it was good to just have that sync up, like, hey, just so you know, I'm just like, not sure about this, or it might be good to have somebody there that could answer this question. So I thought they were both really good process improvements.
I liked our briefings.
Oh,
I
yeah, the
found
briefings.
those actually really helpful.
Yeah, I thought the briefings were good too. Thank you for those.
And I like that, I think having them continue virtually would be nice,
Yeah, for sure.
because I do think, because they were like shorter half-hour meetings, I do think getting down here, it takes up more time. And then we sit around and visit, so that takes up more of your
Well,
time. So if it's a
some-
short meeting, it's kind of a good idea.
Sometimes you don't have, sometimes there wasn't much.
Yeah.
And sometimes there was really important stuff and then some action
Yeah.
steps after.
And I like that those were regularly scheduled, and so we showed up for them, and if someone needed to switch, there was that option, but I never switched because I'm too lazy. I just always stuck with my Wednesday one, or Thursday, and then
I
I
always
switched to Wednesday.
switch into Roseanne,
That's good to know, because I was wondering if they were helpful to you. I like having the
for
whole-
sure.
the
And I like,
time,
Yeah,
especially sometimes I.
yeah, and you could have
invited
special guests, yeah, yeah.
I think like you were saying, the set time, I think that was a really great way to do that, Roseanne. So you're not trying to call us all to tell us something, you're gonna see us once a week
Yeah.
to update us on things.
Yeah, regularly scheduled briefings.
Yeah, everyone, mine was when, so board members,
Individual with Roseanne and the chief.
2 or 3 of us.
They were
That-
check-ins, I would call them check-ins.
Would be a good idea.
Yeah.
I can double check it.
And sometimes they were, things that a student rep could have been at, but oftentimes they weren't.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, but it would be good for Jackson and Roseanne to figure out how to do that in a way that would meet Jackson's needs.
So the chess book idea.
What is a chest clock?
Chess.
Oh, a chest clock, like on Queen's Gambit. I'm like, what are you guys talking about?
You've been worrying about.
So.
Yeah.
Not going there.
I'm like, I'm not wearing that.
Flavor Flav. Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Rita.
Okay, so I just turned around and asked Carrie if you could, if somehow you could set up a timer to the microphone.
Ooh.
What, she holds her, she sets.
Where all of a sudden, where after 5 minutes, it goes.
No, you'd like to keep
When you
track of
turn
our
it on,
time.
Yeah, so that at the end of the meeting, can spit out a.
Yeah, but then someone's gonna claim that they forgot to turn it
The
off.
chess clock is right here.
It's on your phone?
The chess clock.
But you know what, to be honest, I mean, it's not, yes, we have soliloquies, but also it's the cumulative.
Right.
It's like if you think about the word bubbles, if we could make a word bubble.
But I just think, I think what the point here is about time is that just, we need to be thoughtful and we need to be committed to like cultural change. If our value is to have shorter, more efficient meetings, then that's gonna take all of us being really intentional about how we show up. All right, I think, is there anything else? And Rita's gonna do a shot every time Andrew speaks at all board meetings, like she's gonna be at home. So every time Andrew turns on his mic and starts talking, Rita will do a shot, so.
No, we're gonna be in the peanut gallery.
Or we could make, maybe we should.
I want it every time I ask a question.
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, on that note, yeah.
My liver would not be.
Thanks, Terry.
We're gonna
Thank you,
need to leave
Terry. We
there.
are done.